They obviously can't hear me in the boardroom. Can anyone hear me in the boardroom?
Ms. Roberson, can you hear us?
Ms. Roberson, we're here. We're trying to talk to you, but we've been responding, but I don't think you can hear us. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So we apologize. Mr. Prentice was wrapping up another meeting. We're expecting him any moment now.
Okay, so then I was going to let you know that Mr. Calhoun is wrapping up another meeting and he should be up in 5 minutes. So I guess we could wait for both of them.
That works well for everyone, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Roberson, we have Mr. Prentice now. He just arrived from his other meeting, and so we're just awaiting Mr. Calhoun now. We have all sorts of friends coming into the boardroom for this meeting today. Welcome, welcome. I know. I know. We'll send Mr. Garrett out. We're going to send Mr. Garrett with her.
There's no badge. There's no badge.
So, yes.
Hi, Brian Pitts. How are you? Likewise.
Hey, how you doing, Todd? Hey, good to see you. See you.
You as well.
Good to go live? Yeah. Who all we got online? See Darlene. Do we have Velma and Steven online?
Down
Okay.
is online.
I'm here. This is
Good. How are you?
Hi, Ms. Roberson. Mr. Calhoun has arrived, and so I think we'll turn it over to him to get started. Sorry again about earlier.
No problem. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and call this October 1st, 2024 Audit and Finance Committee meeting to order. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as written?
So moved.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Let's go ahead into the approval of our minutes from our September 3rd, 2024 meeting. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes as written? We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion in this second. Who gave the second? All right, perfect. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it. All right, let's go forward to our early Head Start financial report, FY25. As we all know, we are getting these quarterly now. Hello, Ms. Foxworth.
Hello. My keys are very loud today, so I'll take them to the side. Good afternoon, Committee Chairs Calhoun, Roberson, Superintendent Huggins, and committee members. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kim Foxworth. I'm the Executive Director of Early Learning, so I'm over CD, Head Start, and now the new employee childcare. But today I'm here to talk about Head Start, Early Head Start. So today I'm presenting the financial report from June 2024 through September 2024. As a reminder for anybody who's new, that having a Head Start grant, the Charleston County School District is the contract administrator, and you are one of our governing bodies, and you have to have regular approval of our finances. And so I will be coming to you every other month or every quarter for you to review our financial records, including the credit card statements. So just a reminder too, that the Head Start fiscal year is a little bit different than the district. It runs from June 1st through May 31st. So that is why some of the purchases you see are from June 1st. Some key highlights of the report is that the salaries are encumbered from August and September's payroll. The spending in other accounts such as supplies, contractual, and travel are June through September. The salary and wages line will be adjusted once the Office of Head Start approves our reduction in conversion application. That application is on track to be approved sometime this month. The total grant award also includes a 2.35% COLA, and as the previous years, I will be submitting these reports. I'm available to answer any questions, as well as Avis Rock, our financial person, and I also have our new director of Head Start, Early Head Start, Ms. Sharon Gill Morris is here too.
Thank you, Ms. Foxworth. Do we have any questions?
I have a question. This is Belma.
Mhm.
On your budget, on your summary budget, there's a column that says OHS approved budget, and then you have a fiscal year 24 budget. Which one of these budgets are you currently working from?
Sure. First of all, thank you for that. First of all, that should say FY25.
Which
and so
one?
the second where it says FY24, it really should say
Oh, okay.
FY25.
Okay,
So
that's what was
I'll be
confusing
fine.
me.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what is the OHS approved budget? And what's the difference between those budgets, between the FY25 budget and the OHS approved budget?
Sure. So OHS is Office of Head Start. And so
Okay.
every year when we submit a full grant to the Office of Head Start. And so that's how much the Office of Head Start has approved. And Avis, can you talk a little bit about the difference?
Good afternoon.
Good day.
My name is Avis Rock. I'm the budget manager at Head Start Early Head Start. The OHS budget is the budget that's submitted in March of 2024, prior to the board approving any raises and or increases throughout the program. And I want to go back to the FY24. The federal government is operating on FY24 budget.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a misprint, it's just
Oh, yeah.
a reflection of what the federal government is working against.
Okay, thank you. And then, so how do you calculate your variance? What is that variance calculated? That's the difference between which two columns?
The difference between the OHS approved budget and our actual FY24 budget.
Okay, thank you.
The majority of our grant is salaries.
Cool.
And-
Go ahead.
Just moving into the credit card purchases. I noticed that there were several purchases for My Three Sons, which I believe is a restaurant, and then Chick-fil-A. So what type of activities or are these purchases for?
Sure. So the My Three Sons was a training we did over the summer for Child Plus. We had our family advocates come in and have an all-day training on the required software. The Chick-fil-A was, West Ashley Head Start is a standalone center, and so they're not connected with a school, but they're treated like a school. And so if they do, like all elementary schools might do, a back to school welcome back, and so we fund it, so everything will come through us.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further questions? I have one.
Sure.
And I'm sure I already know the answer to this, but with the new centers that you're running right now for the
The employee childcare.
employee
center?
childcare, that has nothing to do with this at all. That's
No.
a part of a different budget that you have. This is only for the Head Start.
This is only Head Start, Early Head Start.
Perfect. Just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hearing no further questions, we will now move forward to 2B. And we'll come back to the vote. Which would be our tax anticipation notes by Mr. Prentice.
Yes, sir. First item for your consideration is a request for recommendation for approval of a resolution to authorize the issuance of a tax anticipation note. This is something that the district typically does each year to provide cash flows during the period in the year in which our cash reserves are the lowest before property taxes are received. So we're asking for an authorization in the amount of $60 million, which is repaid after property tax receipts begin to come in on the other side of the calendar. Interestingly, this year, through our analysis, we believe that we're very close to not needing the tax anticipation note. Specifically, we've met with the county treasurer's office and asked that they give us consideration to ensure that our November tax receipts are deposited before December 15th. And in such case, we believe that we may end up staying positive to the tune of $20 to $30 million at our lowest point throughout the year. But we have a lead time that's baked into needing to be able to issue this tax anticipation note if things change over the next 30 days. So we wanted to go ahead and get the recommendation for approval of the resolution so that we could make a decision based on the likelihood of the outcome and a lower amount if needed. So if we get through our analysis in the next 30 days and determine that we only need $30 million, we would only issue what's needed to be able to sustain cash flows throughout the year and keep things moving in terms of our payroll and accounts payable. So just asking for approval. The interest on the tax anticipation note is budgeted in the general operating fund, so everything's in place there.
All right. Do we have any questions?
I just have a quick question. Daniel, I understood everything you just said. What did we approve in February? What was that TAN for?
So I don't believe there was a TAN in February. I think the board would have approved the bond anticipation note for fixed cost of ownership.
Okay.
I think the resolution was approved right before I started with the district, and then we closed that the second or third week in May.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Roughly what kind of rate are we getting? Would you anticipate? Just curious.
So I'm trying to remember. I think we just closed the refunding. We were sub 4%.
You said 4?
We were at 4% on the refunding, I believe. So I mean, this is a different type of obligation in the sense that it's very short term, but could yield to one of the financial advisors in the room if he believes that that's appropriate on a tax anticipation note, the appropriate rate around 4%.
Hey, Daniel.
Sub 4%.
Oh, we got Jay online.
Yeah, Jay Glover from PFM is on the line. I think it'd be well south of 4%. I think this would probably be below 3% in the current market, in particular with the Fed starting to cut interest rates as they did last week.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Can you talk about our need for them over the next couple of years if we
So assuming things continue on this trend, we'll continue our analysis. And if we get to a point where we know comfortably that we won't need a tax anticipation note, we just wouldn't come forward with the resolution. That's really just a stopgap to continue operations. And the hope is that as we maintain our fund balance and, in alignment with the 5-year plan, that the fund balance that we hold and the way that our revenues are received and our expenditure outflows happen, that we could get away from this completely. And so we would just cease to bring it to the board, but we'll keep you posted on that.
Thank you. That sounds great to me. All right, let's go ahead and move for any further questions. I'm sorry. Hearing none, we're going to move forward to 2C, the 2023 to 2028 capital program, sales tax budget reallocations. We're going to have Mr. Barrow or Jasmine on. All right.
Yes, sir.
Good day,
Thank you,
Jazz.
Chair Calhoun and Ms. Robeson, committee members. This particular item is under the Phase 5 sales tax program. And one item that was on the referendum was for us to design, construct, and equip additional elementary school capacity within the District 23 area. This particular item is really twofold. The first is to approve the scope of work that was chosen, and the second portion is the financials. When it comes to the scope of work, we've done a lot of research. We've also spoken with the principals of each school with support of the SICs. We've spoken with the District 23 Constituent Board, as well as our cabinet. And we've come out with Jane Edwards, as well as Minnie Hughes, to receive a new multipurpose room. Minnie Hughes will also receive an expansion onto their existing media center because based on the size and providing size equity, we need to go ahead and expand their media center, as well as expansion to the media center of E.B. Ellington Elementary School. EB Ellington also has a cafeteria multipurpose room that needs some, I would say, finishes, some renovations, such as putting in a brand new floor, doing some additional painting in that area. And the partition that separates the cafeteria multipurpose room, they'll be getting a new one of those. And so that's the scope of work that we're looking to get approved with this item. When it comes to the financials, we have $11.5 million that was budgeted for this particular item within the referendum. We are not requesting any additional funds. We're going to do the work within the $11.5 million that's available to us. And so with your approval or review, this is the item that we have for you all to review. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with Ms. Roberson.
I don't have a question. I would just like to say this is Christmas in October for D23. And on behalf of the constituents of D23, thank you so much for doing this. This is what closing the gap and inequities look like. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? All right, Jasmine, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. For Jane Edwards and Minnie Hughes, those are media centers, and for EB Ellington, it's the multi-purpose room.
The opposite.
EB, yep, you got them flipped. Jane Edwards and Minnie Hughes are going to get new multi-purpose rooms.
Mhm.
And then Minnie Hughes and EB Ellington are going to get expansions onto their media centers.
Got it. Cool. Thank you very much.
Just a
Yes, sir.
quick reference question. Where
Mr.
can
Garrett.
we look up, or what are, I'm just curious, school sizes?
Mhm.
Is that,
So we have a capacity analysis that's published every year.
okay, all right, I'll look it up.
All right, and I can get you a copy as well.
All right.
Mhm. Cool. Could you get that to all of us as well? You, Mr. Garrett, do you just want it for
Yeah,
23, or do you want it district wide?
No, I'll look at it. I've seen it before, and I think we've
Mhm.
got it in one of our previous things. I'll find it. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Ms. Barrow and Mr. Garrett. All right, we will now move forward to 2D, the 2017-2022 capital program sales tax technology replacement and upgrades budget.
Yes,
Mr.
sir. So we have
Phillips.
a single reallocation here that we're requesting. In the Phase 4 program, there's funds set aside for technology infrastructure. And after reviewing this request, we thought it was most appropriate to bring to the board, since this was a slightly different category in terms of network reinforcement. I'll just say very briefly, in consideration of the cyber event that we encountered over the last few months, we've made some decisions internally on the direction that we'd like to go with our managed detection and response and endpoint detection and response applications that are installed on our data center servers and our endpoint computers and other electronic devices that are distributed and connected to the network. So we're requesting to reallocate $1 million from the technology infrastructure category to the reinforced network category. This would also serve to facilitate a partnership with our state law enforcement division, cybersecurity task force, which would give us a certain layer of monitoring. And so in the event that something's happening suspicious on our network, they have a task force that's engaged in providing services to analyze that activity and kind of centrally manage and report back to the end entity, response tactics and some of the considerations that we may not have otherwise received. So this would provide for the third-party application as well as for that partnership with the state, and just request your approval on that reallocation, and we'll pick up the cost in future software.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
Daniel, if you could just go back up just right to your probably last 3 sentences. So this, and I absolutely love this, and I'm so glad that we're doing it. You said this is going to give us direct contact with law enforcement, so information will go directly to them without having to make a phone call?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. So any activity on our network environment that is deemed suspicious, they would have access to monitoring services and would be able to investigate immediately whenever those things came about. And so in that instance as well, you get sort of a 24-hour monitoring service because they have their cybersecurity task force that's administered in Columbia. And so they would have the ability to see activity on our network in real time around the clock.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
On that, can they stop it, or they have to still get contact if there's an issue found on the network and they do something to have it stopped, or they still have to make a phone call to somebody else
So that's the other piece of it. So the piece with SLED would be more of a monitoring. The managed detection and response and the endpoint detection and response would be the piece that would stop the activity or would shut down the system and isolate it.
I didn't even see you back there. How you doing? Cool. And I actually have one question to the SLED piece as well. Are other districts using this as well? Or are we like one of the first to actually go into this partnership with SLED?
I think this would be the largest K-12 partnership. This is something new with the cybersecurity task force that was established back a couple of years ago, I believe. And so there's other municipal partners that are in place. I think the origin of it was to support, entities that had criminal justice information data that they were storing, but it's become a more expanded service for public networks.
Cool. Thank you very much. We'll get to that. And let's go down to 2E, the fixed cost of ownership FY25 budget reallocation.
Yes, sir, Mr. Calhoun. So as in the past, we accrue some additional interest in our contingency line, and we're bringing forward a recommendation to distribute a good portion of that into our projects, $900,000 to be specific. $715,000 we're proposing to go to facility maintenance. That would cover two things. One is a canopy at Baptist Hill, providing a walkway cover to get to the nurses clinic, and the rest would be used for the continuation of the elementary school HVAC analysis and any repairs necessary following the Whitesides work that was done last year. Second line item is for information technology to close out two audio enhancement system projects where additional rooms were added at Midland Park and James B. Edwards. The next item would be also one for IT, classroom technology upgrades. This is to provide additional schools with the Yonder pouches, to provide cell phone holding containers during the school day. And lastly, a little bit of resources sent to Media Center for additional ebook purchases.
Cool. And the Yonder, I'm sorry, do we have any questions? Ms. Robertson?
No, I just wanted to thank Mr. Barori for the canopy at Baptist Hill. This is a necessity, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My only question would be for the Yonder pouches. These are the ones for schools outside of the pilot program or just within the pilot program? I got to answer that question before.
So we had $50,000 budgeted in the last spring. The request from schools came in higher. And so this would be outfitting an additional 5 schools. Total of 6 schools would be outfitted with the Yonder projects. Some of them, like Jerry Zucker, had them last year, but they're being refurbished or reissued. Anything to add to that? Or?
No, that's so that the 6 schools that's the core of the pilot now going forward, unless anyone chose to buy them with WSF or some other funding source. So in this instance, those 6 schools got capacity for the entirety of the school. And we'll make any consideration for extending this or doing anything further with it in FY26.
So with Zucker, they had them last year, and they are already looking to replace some of them, not all of them, but just some of them or not?
A majority of them.
Okay, so
yeah, they take a beating.
That's what I was about to ask. How often are we going to have to repurchase these?
I will give an early opinion based upon the wear and tear and the ability for these things to maintain themselves over more than one fiscal period or one school year at $25 or so per unit over the course of the system. I don't know that it's an efficient way to secure cell phones. And so I don't think we would want to look at the overall cost of deploying Yonder to the entirety of the system. We may, and I understand some schools have taken alternative routes like putting a shoe hanger over the back of a door with a slot for the cell phones to go in. And that's a very economical way to handle it. So with the new cell phone law and policy, we'll have to consider something that makes sense for the district instead of something that's going to be a consumable item that wears out over 12 months at that type of a cost.
Right, because if this is just for 6 schools, I can imagine district-wide.
Only six schools at over $150,000. So that
5,000 units, a little over 5,000 units, 5,100, I think, counting them. $50,000 already had.
All right, Ms. Huggins. As we look at the new policy that has to be implemented, and I know since we're looking at the financial side, where do you feel as if we should be moving towards since we have to put something in soon? What do you think we should be?
Thank you for that. Well, we'll bring the first reading of that policy to the board in October. But we have schools right now that, of course, as Mr. Prentice and Mr. Burrow shared, are piloting Yonder, but we also have schools that are doing other pilot initiatives. Lucy Beckham, for example, doing shoe holders out at Hot Gap. They're doing boxes that have corrugated inserts for folks to slip the cell phones in. And so we're going to assess the usefulness, the practicality, and the success of other sites. But as a senior team, we don't believe that the ongoing fiscal investment required by Yonder would be prudent on behalf of the district.
Right. So we'll be looking at if we pass the policy after first reading, second reading, if we get a policy through by December, we should have a true something for the schools by January.
A soft launch in January. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we do think the first and second reading will, at the board's discretion be approved by the end of November. And then we'll work. Of course, we're working with principals now. They've been anticipating this. Dr. Clamp and the associates are socializing this topic so that principals can collaborate around what's been useful and helpful for teachers. Most of the pilots we have going on across the district have been very successful.
Okay. Brings me to my final question. Do you feel as if we will need another reallocation come January, February from either FCO or any other place?
There's a good chance that we'll need another, we want to use the remaining contingency, and if interest build up, we'll have a need for it. So there'll probably be another FCO reallocation at the start of the next calendar year. Not for Yonder. I'm sorry, not for Yonder.
Okay.
But I thought you just meant a general reallocation.
Oh, yeah.
No, we don't intend to push the Yonder projects anymore.
Okay. Perfect. That's all the questions I have. Any further questions? All right, hearing none. Do we have any public comments today? None signed up, none online. All right, let's go ahead and get to the action items. We're going to go first to 3A, the Head Start, Early Head Start financial report. Do we have a motion to approve the Head Start and Early Head Start financial report and credit card expenditures for June 2024 to September 2024? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Now on to 3B. This is for our 2024 tax anticipation note. Now we have a motion that the Charleston County School District Board of Trustees adopt a resolution approving the issuance of the tax anticipation note to meet cash flow requirements. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Let's move to 3C. The 3C will be the 2023-2028 capital program sales tax budget reallocation. Do we have a motion to approve the reallocation of funds for the capital program sales tax? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Let's go forward to the capital program sales tax for the technology replacement and upgrades. Do we have a motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown as the attached resolution and as it relates to the 2017 to 2022 sales tax technology replacement? We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. And lastly, our fixed cost of ownership FY25 budget reallocation. Do we have a motion to approve the reallocation for the FCO FY25 budget? We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Now let's move forward to our information items. Let's go to Mr. Prentice for our purchases and contracts greater than $250,000.
All right, for purchases and contracts over $250,000, we actually do not have any new competitive procurement detail for the month. So that's why that page is blank. Of course, now with this being done on a look back basis based on how the report runs from the 15th of the month to the 15th of the following month, it just looks at anything that PO was issued related to a competitive procurement during that period of time. So there was nothing that was awarded during that period of time. On the second page of the appendix of other methods, we did have a few various other methods, a couple of sole sources related to leading educators. It's the same contract. It was just multiple different funding sources in terms of how it was configured. We have a contract that was an existing contract in the Office of Federal Programs, some state contract furniture, A couple of change orders related to early college and the St. James Santee projects. And then we also have our home to school bus transportation contract, which was split into a number of different purchase orders. So we just aggregated that all together into the total amount that was issued under the contract during the past month as we opened up the new fiscal year. And of course, that was a competitively awarded contract that was extended, and the Audit and Finance Committee was involved in that this past year with the 5-year renewal. The only other note I'll mention is we have wrapped up work on the P-card manual. So I don't have that linked in this month, but we will have it for information and linked into the report next month. And we're preparing communications to share that information out with schools. The changes in that particular manual are not any less restrictive than current circumstances. They're intended to promote the use of P-cards in a more flexible manner, but ensuring the guardrails that are currently in place are administered. And then we're currently working on the procurement procedures manual as the next item and hope to have that to share as information by the end of the year.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Daniel, will you have training for building level folks on the P-card manual, or it's each building going to receive a copy? How is that going to be facilitated?
Yes, ma'am. There's a few different ways. So we're going to do training for users on P-cards, as well as push out a memo on all of the changes as a summary so that everyone knows kind of particularly what changed. And then anytime a new user gets a P-card, they'll receive training on the current set of circumstances in the manual, as well as at the renewal period of their card. Existing users go through the training. So we're updating all those materials to match. So I'll bring that forward and share it as information and go over the summary of the changes in the November Audit and Finance, just to make sure everyone's aware of it at this level.
Okay. And my final question is, I believe there was some questions regarding when an employee leaves the system and the process of turning in or deactivating their P-card. Is that covered in that manual as well?
I'll have to go back and look at the specificity of that. We do have a process where when somebody is terminated out of the system, we end their card, and sometimes we don't always get the card back, but we always, deactivate and end the rights on the card. But I'm not sure if it's spoken to specifically in the manual. I'll have to check on that.
Okay. Do you know, I'm not sure if Mr. Brigman is in, is that something that if it's not through finance, is it a part of the exit process in HR?
I don't know if Mr. Brigman is in here, but it would be through finance.
Okay.
I just need to check and see where it's spelled out, which particular section of the manual, but it'll be a separate item on the November agenda so we can go through all those details. I just wanted to mention, since we've been focusing on those 2 red items on this report, that has been wrapped up, and we're switching gears to work on the next one with the procurement procedures now.
Great. And I just want to say, Ms. Huggins, let Mr. Darby know that I'm going to come over. He has a lot of, he has new classroom furnitures. So he has a new outfit over there. So I'm excited for him.
I'll do that, Mrs. Roberson. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? One quick question about roughly how many P-cards do we have in our system right now?
Between 500 and 600.
Okay.
About 510.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Prentice. We will now move forward to our ESSER update. Almost over.
Second to last ESSER report.
Mm-hmm.
So for the month ended August 31st, we have $158.3 million in reimbursements to date of the $163.2 million of total funding received. What I'll note here is that during the month of September, we went through a process and got a final plan amendment with the State Department of Education. And what that did was took any funds that were encumbered or unencumbered remaining and reallocated them to salaries that were already approved categories in the plan, just moved the money from one category to the other. Mm-hmm. And then we journaled or moved the expenditure from the general operating fund for those salaries to the ESSER fund for the month July 1, 2024 through September 30th, 2024, in order to ensure that every last dollar of ESSER was reimbursable. So when you see the September report, you'll see the remaining expenditures during the month of September. And then after the month of September, we might do some type of a hybrid report in October that shows those final reimbursements coming back in. And then we'll update on things like audits and closeout activities from that point forward as this pieces of information are available.
Cool. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Prentice. We will move forward. The monthly financial reports.
All right, so we have two documents here, the monthly financial report for the general operating fund and the WSF report. So for the GOF monthly financial update, not a tremendous amount of information in here. We're beginning to receive some monthly payments from the state, and in terms of, bless you, property taxes and receipts that are coming in for vehicles and some of the business personal property. We also posted some sale of fixed assets. Expenditures are tracking the budget. And of course, you'll see the majority of those revenues coming in after tax bills go out in the fall into the new year. But I will say during the month of September, we received our assessment reports from the Charleston County Auditor's Office and signed off on those numbers. And our assessments and the revenues that we signed off on were within 1% of budget. So we do know now that what we budgeted is going to be very close to what we actually collect. And I will specify that the amount received from the auditor's office showed about 1% more than what we budgeted. So we'll be very close this year in terms of our actual revenues that we receive based upon those confirmed assessments that are going to be billed later this fall. So once we have that information in final form, we'll share another version of the 5-year plan with the revenues adjusted, but it's going to be substantially the same to what we anticipated during the budget process until we get a little further along. On the WSF report, we have done a couple of things here this month, one of which is we added, I think Dr. Temple requested some tooltips where when you hover over a box, it would show you the percentage and the amount, so you weren't having to go back and correlate it to the colors on the chart. That doesn't work in the PDF, but we're working on getting that posted in like an HTML frame on the website. So once that gets posted, all that information will be available, and we'll link to it in this report in the future months. If you go down to the 4th page with the detail by location, one thing that we did this month was remove the encumbrances for payroll, something we do in the general operating fund to help us project where our salaries are going to be at the end of the year, is encumber the remaining salaries through the end. But what that can do is we only encumber once per month. And sometimes once you've processed an additional month's payroll or additional biweekly payroll, but haven't adjusted the encumbrance, it can make it look like it's over. And so we just removed the payroll encumbrances and are showing true encumbrances for purchase orders for non-salaries in that particular column. So the available budget, the remaining budget, is reflective of things like salaries and benefits that are ongoing throughout the year. And the column to focus on would be the difference between the actual and the allocated budget to see how much a school has left to potentially allocate from the amount that they received.
Cool. All right. Do we have any questions on either of those reports? Here and now, I do have one quick question. Are we going to, when we have it posted to the website, are we going to basically put a title on it to say, purchase orders for non-salaries on there, just to make it clear that salaries are not included within it?
We'll have some notes. I was speaking with Ms. Caraher and other members with business intelligence over the course of the week, and there's a possibility that they bring this data into Power BI, which is a different type of presentation portal where we could have some footnotes and things like that indicated. So it might look a little bit different when it ends up online, but they're working on that programming to take this is live data from our accounting system and convert it to something that can be publicly visible. If I was to give you that link right now, you'd be able to get to it as a board member, but you have to log in using your CCSD credentials. So we're trying to figure out how to get that data past the credentialing wall and out to the public in a real-time basis so that it's always fresh.
Perfect. Thank you. Hearing no further questions, we will move on to my favorite report, the monthly capital projects report.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'd like to present the August capital projects report this afternoon, please. Our revenue collections for July of 2024 were $110,000 above the cash flow projections. Our expenditures are as follows. For the 2010 through 2016 program, $79,000. The 2017 through 2022 program, $3.5 million. The 2023 through 2028 program, $21.5 million. The 2023 through 2028 long-term debt program, $1.4 million. Fixed cost of ownership 24 is wrapping up very quickly, and 25 is commenced and is off to a really good start. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? All right, thank you. Hearing none, we will move forward to the analysis of union peer TIF requests. Is that executive session?
So what I had proposed here was to do the analysis in open session, if it pleases the committee, to share the information on the TIF revenues and the benefit to CCSD from the 75 Calhoun project that we've discussed, and then to go into executive session to specifically discuss the intergovernmental agreement with the city of Charleston.
Thank you. Any objections to that? Good. All right, let's proceed that way and let us know when we're ready to go inside of executive session.
Say again?
I said, let's proceed with that and let us know when we're ready to go inside of executive session.
Okay, absolutely. So I'd like to introduce Mr. David Cheatwood with First Tryon Advisors. He has prepared the analysis and the discussion report for the Audit and Finance Committee to review before it goes to the Board of Trustees. And so I'm inviting him to come up to the podium, and if we possibly could pull that item from Board Docs and share it for reference so that everybody can see it on the screen. Stephen, I'll come up there and show you which one in particular, but that's the report that we're going to go through. So if you're logged into Board Docs, the particular document is Charleston County School District TIF discussion. And then there's an accompanying memo that gives significantly more descriptive detail on the narrative, but this is more focused on the charts and for the purposes of the discussion, and then we can dive into any questions or anything that we might have before we go into the next steps. One thing I'll mention as he does that, the information that was gathered for this report was pulled directly from the City of Charleston redevelopment plan. Mr. Cheatwood's firm worked with Water Street Public Finance, which is a company that the City of Charleston worked with to develop the plan of finance for Union Pier. So the correlation of information coming from the city and fed into our analysis is very specifically from what the city provided to us. So we're not doing any secondary level of analysis in terms of trying to hypothesize what Union Pier might look like. This is all information directly from the models that they put together. So it's very specifically tied to that in terms of the assumptions that are made.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Prentice, you said if we are in Board Docs, we should be looking for what?
It is Charleston County School District TIF discussion. It's under executive content on the analysis of Union Pier TIF request item.
I don't see that.
I have it under mine logged in.
I'm logged in.
Ms. Roberson, Ms. Tolbert's going to email it to the members so that you have it readily available, and I'm going to get it to Mr. Wyatt so he can get it up on the screen.
Thank you.
Mr. Prentice, if you could, since I'm not at my computer, if you could have them email it to my personal email address.
You should have it.
Mr. Prentice, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you, Mr. Grabowski. It's Anita. We will get that sent over to you in just a second.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, my apologies there. Mr. Grabowski, Ms. Tolbert's going to email it to you right now, but we now have it pulled up on the screen. So I'll let Mr. Cheatwood proceed.
Oh, I can actually see it on the screen.
Go ahead. Okay, great. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Superintendent Huggins, board members, committee members, thanks very much for having me here today. My name is David Cheatwood, and I work at a firm called First Tryon Advisors based in Charlotte. Our firm serves as financial advisor to cities, counties, school districts, and utility systems across the state. And in that role, we help those entities with long-term financial capital planning and the issuance of debt. And a big part of our role, we do a lot of work with tax increment financing districts across the state. A lot of our clients have those or are considering putting those in place. So we're very familiar with those structures, as I know the school district is as well. You all participate in a number of TIFs. And so, as Daniel said, we prepared a memo that provided a lot of detail on the analysis we went through, and then we've got some slides summarizing that analysis, which we'll pull up here. Daniel and Superintendent Huggins tasked our firm with looking from a financial perspective only, not a legal or strategic perspective, but financial analysis on the school district's participation or contribution to the Union Pier TIF district. Versus the potential benefit that you would gain from potentially occupying the fourth floor of this building, which you would agree to as a part of your intergovernmental agreement with the city. And so this is what that analysis lays out here. And so if I can, perfect, thank you very much. Looking at page 1, big, as you can imagine, a long-term financial plan analysis like this involves a lot of assumptions. So I wanted to highlight those assumptions on the front end. As Daniel mentioned, the city's prepared a very in-depth redevelopment plan. We've looked at that redevelopment plan. We've talked to the city's consultant who helped them prepare that to get a good understanding of the assumptions that went into that. And we've taken a lot of those assumptions just to remain consistent with what the city's looking at in its redevelopment plan here. So to summarize, and this is all focused on the school district's contributions to or participation in the Union Pier TIF district first. We've assumed that the TIF district is created this calendar year, November of 2024, your fiscal year 2025. We've assumed that when that is created, it'll have an initial equalized assessed value of $3,144,240. That's the current assessed value of all of the taxable parcels that are identified in the Union Pier TIF district. So as y'all know, you have the Union Pier parcels, and then you have 14 non-Union Pier parcels. The non-Union Pier parcels are the ones that have taxable value. The Union Pier do not. So that's where that $3,144,000 comes from. Once you create that TIF district, that value is frozen. And as y'all know, any additional development that occurs that increases the assessed value above and beyond that creates the incremental tax revenues. A few other assumptions here. We have assumed that the sale of the parcels would be completed in calendar year 2027. At that point, those parcels would become taxable. Those would have some taxable value driven largely by the sales price, which is unknown at this point in time. But those would become taxable in 2027. And that means the tax bill would reflect that in fall of 28. And then the city and the other parties would receive tax revenue on that in, call it January of 2029 or fiscal year 29. Outside of that sale, we've assumed additional private investment over the course of the life of the Union Pier TIF district in the amount of $35 million. That's going to consist of two pieces. The first is the smaller piece, the $35 million. That is development that's currently under construction right now. As we understand it, there's a 119 unit apartment building that's under construction at Lawrence and Washington Street. The city's consultant has made an estimate and an assumption on what that taxable value would be, and that would be assessed at 6%. So that would create incremental assessed value of $1.6 million. That's the estimate. So again, that's occurring right now. That project's expected to be completed in calendar year 2025. Therefore, that incremental tax revenue would start flowing in fiscal year 2027. So that's the smaller piece. The larger piece, of course, is the development of the Union Pier parcels. The assumption for that is approximately $2 billion of investment, private investment, taxable investment over a 15-year period. The assumption is that would start in 2030, and we've assumed that would come in increments or in pieces over time over a 15-year period through calendar year 2044. Of that $2 billion, the assumption is $1.25 billion, or approximately 63%, would be 6% property, and the balance of $750 million, or 37%, would be 4% property. We've assumed that the school districts, in helping calculate what the potential contribution of the school district would be to this TIF, we've assumed that your current fiscal year 25 millage rate remains in effect for the life of the TIF. Again, have to start somewhere with an assumption here. And that total millage rate, as you all know, is 168.2 mills, consisting of 145.2 operating mills and 23 debt service mills. Lastly, we've assumed those tax increment revenues won't be captured until the city issues its first obligation that's secured by those tax increment revenues. We've assumed, again, based on looking at the redevelopment plan as well, that first issuance would occur in fiscal year 2033. And at that point in time, the proposed term of the TIF is 30 years. So that 30-year clock would start in 2033, and go out to fiscal year 2062. That's important to note because any revenues, and there would likely be revenues prior to 2033, those would flow to the school district and the other participating entities, namely the city and the county there. And that's part of our analysis. So if you go to the next slide, this is, again, focused, taking all of those assumptions and then looking at, and I apologize for the small numbers here, but looking at the projected or estimated incremental revenues that would be generated from that little over $2 billion of private development or taxable development here. If you look starting from left to right on this table, you'll start with our baseline value of $3,144,000. The incremental assessed value would be based on that development schedule that I just went through, including, you'll see the initial in fiscal year 27, 1.6 million of incremental assessed value. That's that 119 unit apartment complex. And then it would step up with the sale of the building, which would come into play in calendar year 27 and therefore flow in terms of tax increment revenues in fiscal 29. And then you'll see an incremental step up each year from 2030 out to 2044, which is driven by the private development. That 15 years of private development, keeping in mind there's really a 2-year lag of when you'd receive the revenues. So we're taking that incremental assessed value and then multiplying that by the school district's millage. That's going to create that far right column of the incremental tax revenues that would be generated. So the dividing line here of fiscal year 2032, the assumption is prior to that date, so prior to the city's initial issuance of obligations secured by those revenues, the development would create to the school district incremental property tax revenue of $12.8 million. At that point in time in 2033, once the city issues its initial obligation, those funds, those incremental revenues would flow into the TIF district. The city would be able to utilize those to fund its redevelopment projects or pay back debt that funds those projects. The total from 2033 to 2062, that 30-year time period, would be $345 million. So that is the one side of the equation, the city's contribution or participation in the Union Pier TIF district. If we look at the benefit that the school district could realize by occupying the 4th floor of this building, which the city currently uses, we subcontracted out with a local commercial real estate broker, Charles Carmody from CBRE, to help us evaluate what is the value of that 4th floor office space. So the total rentable square feet in this building is just under 88,000 square feet. That's consists of the floors 2 through 4, the office space. The rentable square feet of the 4th floor is 29,427 feet. Based on Mr. Carmody's report and analysis, looking at just comps across the city for office space, the lease revenue per square foot based on current market is $37. As you all know, this generally goes up in each and every year. So we want to make an assumption, a growth assumption on that value. And so we've made an assumption of 3% in consultation with Mr. Carmody there of what that lease revenue per square foot would be. So looking at the $37 per square foot times the 29,000 square feet, that would generate a little over $1 million in lease revenue as that grows. And assuming you can occupy that building, that floor beginning in fiscal 26, that would generate value to you all of $1,121,000, growing by 3% year over year. So that is real value to you based on the value of that office space. The other ancillary benefit here of taking over the fourth floor for your space would be you get some operational savings from your building at Bridgeview. If we look at your total operational cost at Bridgeview, based on my discussions with Mr. Prentice, about $780,000. And looking at that, you've got about a third of your employees that are in mobile units at Bridgeview. So if you're able to move certain employees from Bridgeview to 75 Calhoun, that would be able to free up those mobile units and therefore reduce your operational cost at that site. So what we did is we looked at the $780,000 total operational cost, the third of employees that are in mobile units, and just simply took a pro rata allocation. So if you all were able to eliminate those mobile units, you would generate operational savings of about $260,000 per year. Assuming, again, we start that in fiscal 26, we're growing that by 3% per year. So you'll see that 260,000 growing to 265,000 in 2026 and each year thereafter. One thing I neglected, I'll go back here in a second, but the total value of those operational savings over the term of the TIF district would be about $17.5 million. If you go back one slide, sorry, I forgot to hit the punchline in the total there. Going back to the current building benefit, that 1.1 million growing over time would produce value of about 74.2 million in terms of your benefit there. So if we compare the contributions or participation to the benefits from occupying the fourth floor on the summary comparison slide, you'll see, again, starting from left to right, you have your lease revenue equivalent, that benefit coming from the current building, the operational savings at Bridgeview, and then the tax increment revenues that would be generated prior to the city's initial issuance that would flow to the school district. You can see your total revenues over this time period through 2062 would be about 104.6 million. If we look at the school district's revenues, tax increment revenues that it would contribute to the TIF district, that totals about 345 million. And we've compared that on a cash flow basis, annual basis, starting in 2026. That net cash flow, that's looking simply at the total benefit or revenues received versus the revenues contributed. You'll see that you are positive in every year until 2033, when that contribution to the TIF district kicks in. And then if you look at it on a total cumulative cash flow basis, you'll see that you're positive through 2038, after which, again, you are contributing more to the TIF district. What I should note, and as you'll know, at the end of the TIF district, it reverts back to normal property and those revenues flow to you all. And so after the TIF district expires, based on this scenario in 2062, the school district would realize revenues of 3.6 million per year. Sorry, 13.6 million per year. So last page here in terms of what happens if you don't participate. So we've run a scenario where, I think we all would agree that if you don't participate, or as I don't want to make that assumption, there's the commonly held view, if you don't participate, any sort of development there would be on a much smaller scale, just because there's not enough revenues flowing there to do some of the infrastructure projects that would be necessary for the larger contemplated development. So assuming there is still some development there, but on a much smaller scale, we've had to make some assumption. So we've assumed that the assessed value in that area, those same Union Pier parcels and the other 14 parcels that make up the TIF district, would grow on average by 3% per year. In addition, you'd get the benefit of the 119 unit apartment complex that would be coming online next year. So if we look at those, based on those assumptions, that first column, the school district revenues realized and the incremental property tax revenues, you'll see that over this time period through 2062 again, you would get total tax increment revenues of about $26 million. However, you would likely not get the benefit of the fourth floor, so you would lose that lease equivalent revenue, and in turn, you would not get the operational savings, and you would not get the TIF revenues that would be generated prior to the city's issuance of its first obligation under the larger scale development. And so again, looking at that, those far right columns, out of the gate on an annual basis, that's a cash flow negative, which just grows over time. Happy to answer any other questions. One thing I should also note on the fourth floor, that lease right now, we talk about the full benefit to the school district, and that's because the city does not pay rent on the fourth floor. And so the current lease agreement with the city runs through 2092, I think is what we looked at. And so that's a long time there before you all could possibly start to earn revenue or realize the benefit of utilizing that fourth floor. So happy to answer any other questions or any questions y'all have on that analysis that we've done.
Thank you very much. Let's go on order for this one. Ms. Roberson, do you have any questions? Mr. Grabowski?
Yes. So let's go back to the last statement. The city doesn't pay any lease on 75 Calhoun for the fourth floor until 2092. So I'm assuming that, which we will discuss, I mean, in an executive session, whatever, that we're going to be assuming the city's lease. Who owns the building?
So, Mr. Grabowski, CCSD owns the building, but it was a joint development project in the 1993 to 1995 timeframe, whereby the city of Charleston deeded the land over to CCSD with a reverter clause. If we didn't deliver the building with the square footage for them to occupy, then the land reverted back to the city. So we partnered and shared in the cost of developing this building, and in sharing the cost and them conveying the land to CCSD, in turn gave them a 99-year lease for occupancy on the fourth floor. So once the financial obligation for building this facility was paid off, there was no other financial obligation due from the city. So at this point in time, from 2025 until 2092, they have access to 30,000 square feet at no cost to the city. And so the virtue here would be that they would give that up in 2026, and some 60 years earlier than otherwise planned.
So we would have everything free and clear in 2092, or well, however this works out. Okay.
Yes, sir. And that we're going to talk about that a bit more when it comes to the intergovernmental agreement. But the conditioning would be that CCSD's participation in the union peer TIF would be based upon the city releasing their interest in 75 Calhoun Street, and therefore giving us immediate occupancy of the third floor and full free and clear control of this entire building for perpetuity.
The other question is on Lawrence and Washington ongoing construction, which is going through. So as I understand it, is when the city's obligation comes through, that this is going to be rolled into the TIF. And that's what that second chart showed, that without the state property being sold, we would still be getting this small amount from this other ongoing development.
That's correct. That's the assumption. Once the TIF district is created, which we've assumed would be later this calendar year, November, the current assessed values are frozen. Since that project's not expected to be completed until next year, that would then be incremental assessed value once completed and a tax bill sent out.
And just for analysis, my last question goes on to the millage rate assumptions. While I always hope that we never have to raise millage rates, I mean, that's not a viable hope. But so there's, and I guess we just have to go to the, talk about the IGA, but can we talk about this? Is there any downside or potential problem that we would face based upon these analysis should we raise the millage rate on the final number on the analysis? I mean, this is just a baseline number, correct?
That's correct. Just a starting point for assumptions here. We could look at it, and often we do look at it both ways. If we assume that your millage rate goes up, then of course you'll be contributing more to the TIF district there. However, as other assessed values go up, and every 5 years with reassessment, if everything goes up and you all look at a lower millage rate, then that can offset that as well. And so there's a lot of variables at play there. And so I guess at least starting out, we've assumed that it's flat, but no doubt there will be some fluctuation over this long-term period, but need to make a starting point assumption.
Thank you. I have no more further questions, Mr. Calhoun.
Thank you. Ms. Robertson, excuse me, Ms. Robertson, I saw you come back. Did you have any questions?
No.
Excuse me, Ms. Stamp.
And I'm sure you discussed it, but where would this TIF district, I know it's downtown around Lawrence Street, but what exactly would be the area for this TIF district, or is that not decided yet?
So, Ms. Stamp, if you look in the attachment, it's the Union Pier notice letter to Charleston County School District on board docs. The particular page, just to give you an idea, there's a map in there with the parcels outlined. It's on page 17. It highlights the area that constitutes the TIF district. So there's the big parcel that is owned by the State Ports Authority that borders the harbor, and then there's several inland parcels that are generally bound. I believe that's by Lawrence Street all the way down to Market Street.
Okay.
And then East Bay Street.
And can you explain again to me when this whole TIF district, what is trying to be accomplished here by creating these districts? I keep hearing benefits to the school district and that type of thing, but who's really benefiting, and who's going to be building on these properties?
So, Ms. Stamp, the way the state law works in South Carolina, cities and counties can establish these tax increment financing districts to redevelop blighted areas predominantly. And in this particular case, the city, we understand, is working to establish the TIF, and a developer is going to come in and redevelop the Union Pier area, particularly this State Ports Authority owned parcel. And by creating the tax increment financing district, the revenues of all the taxing entities in that area. So in this case, that would be the city of Charleston, Charleston County School District, and the Charleston County Park and Recreation Commission would give up the growth in the assessed value on the properties in that area for a determined period of time. And the city, being that they're the lead agency that is establishing the TIF, could use the dollars to develop public infrastructure in that area to help spur private investment, with the idea that when the TIF district concludes at the end of the time period, that the tax revenues would be substantially higher than they were should the TIF never have been established, or if the growth was done more organically where the city didn't have the ability to bring in that infrastructure and it was all saddled through private investment. So in this particular case, we're doing something a little bit differently than what CCSD has ever done before in proposing this deal. Traditionally, CCSD has just consented or not consented to participate in a TIF district, and that could be for a certain period of time or a certain amount of our millage levy, and kind of the plain approach to it. So in this circumstance, we said, we appreciate the interest and desire for CCSD to participate, but we really need to see something of value up front to CCSD. And so the state law allows for public entities to enter into intergovernmental agreements to condition their participation in the TIF districts. And so that's what we seek to do here. And so in executive session, we're going to go over the intergovernmental agreement and talk with you further about how that agreement would bring benefit to CCSD very early on in the TIF in partnership with the city for them to receive these revenues over a fixed period of time.
Okay, because right now I'm not seeing those benefits. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
I don't have any questions.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Duke.
No, I have no questions.
Ms. Allison.
No questions yet.
All right.
Sorry, I have a number of questions. My first question is more general on this. How does this analysis compare? Put aside the lease, because I know that's a different different circumstance, but how does this analysis compare to other TIF analyses that you do for other districts? Is this pretty down the fairway? Is this trade-off? Like how does this look?
I would say this is down the fairway. I mean, we, as I mentioned, work with a lot of, and most of the time cities create TIFs. Sometimes counties do as well, as Daniel mentioned, but for the most part, there is collaboration among the taxing entities and participation. But there are from time to time negotiations with that, whether it's something kind of an ancillary benefit that can be provided here, or if there's a particular building or something that can be built in this that benefits one of the taxing districts as well. That comes up from time to time. And so it really varies place to place, but in general, there's collaboration because the goal is to try to enhance this blighted area, grow it so that when the TIF district expires, there's a lot more tax increment revenue there than when it started. And so, or what otherwise would occur without a TIF district. And so I would say by and large across the state, there is kind of working towards a common goal, but there is negotiation from time to time among the taxing entities and the creating entity.
Are there any sort of key variables that you would sensitize in looking at this analysis from the board member perspective?
You've highlighted, or one of the questions highlighted one, just your millage rate. That can of course affect your contribution higher or lower, and how that changes over time. I mean, the biggest component, and this is a very high level assumption, is $2 billion worth of investment over a 15-year time period. There are no development plans that have been publicized. Hadn't been any rezoning hearings or anything like that. So that's very much an assumption, and it's going to very much depend on what those plans look like, what the market looks like over that time frame. And so I think those are big numbers. So that's going to be the primary driver of what ultimately gets contributed from all the taxing participating entities is based on that development schedule and plan. I think if that's on that side, on the other side, the benefit you're getting, as Daniel mentioned, that could be immediate and right away versus there are probably more variables on the TIF side.
It looks like, if I follow it correctly, the analysis in terms of tax values is in nominal dollars, that you're not inflation adjusting that.
That's correct. That's right.
So it assumes the baseline asset value stays the same. So the $345 million that we're potentially foregoing, if inflation is 2% or so, that's going to be $500+ million, correct?
That's right. If that $2 billion today ends up being 2.5, $3 billion, yes, those values will go up.
Right. And then on the lease analysis, we're assuming the $37 essentially leases at 100% for the full term, right? We're not going to lease that space to somebody else, right? We're going to move our own people into it. Are we going to cut 30,000 square feet lease somewhere else to save that $37 in rent?
Eliminate those trailers.
I'm sorry?
We'll eliminate the trailers.
Right. But so it seems like our analysis is double dipping because we're getting the benefit, the full value benefit of that space at $37, which is full rent. And we're assuming we're moving trailers. So just put it into practical terms. Are we going to save a lease payment somewhere?
So
I would get saving the 30% if we move people into here, but how do we get both benefits?
So we don't lease, nothing that they're occupying is leased. We use the lease rate to determine the economic benefit back to CCSD from gaining the space. Because right now we're giving the city the occupancy and paying the O&M. And so that lease rate is broken down into a market rent and an O&M piece that we would get the benefit of, by being able to occupy the fourth floor. The Bridgeview campus operational savings are really just the component of the trailers going away, because the finance division that occupies the 2-story office building at Bridgeview would move down here to the fourth floor, and that would allow for all of operations to centralize in the 2-story office building there at Bridgeview.
So I understand what that is, but that's double dipping, right? We're giving ourselves the full value of the space, theoretically, and we're moving the people into the space.
Since you mentioned it before the meeting, my thought about it was, what if you had to value it as a lease buyout, which effectively it is.
Right, but if you did, then you would turn it around and use it for some economic benefit. And say you rent, let's say we leased it to somebody and got that $37 value, right? Let's say we leased it to a third party and got $37. We wouldn't be able to then, we could get that 37, but we wouldn't also get the trailer operational efficiencies.
Correct. So in the instance where let's just say Bridgeview was humming right along and we didn't have any need for additional space, we could turn around and put a, for rent sign on the 4th floor and bring, the private market into the building and collect rent on that 4th floor for some period of time or perpetually. But we wouldn't then be able to move people from Bridgeview and save the operational savings. That's just the circumstantial element of the fact that we actually do need to move people from one to the other, and then therefore shed some of our real estate, which happens to be mobile in nature.
So I still think it's double dipping. I get the theoretical economic value, but we can't have two people in that same space at the same time. So how do you think about in these analyses? You do it all in nominal dollars. I mean, we do it all in collective effort. We don't discount, there's an additional value to the district of that future, whatever, the year 2063 incremental tax revenue, the $13 million has some value today. You could cap it at 4% or something. It's actually not as enormous as you would think because it's so far out in the future. Right. And if you discount it back today, it's not as big as it might feel like it should be. But there's value there that's not reflected in our analysis.
That's correct. We could keep carrying that forward once you receive that 13.6 million in 2063. We could keep carrying that forward, present value it back to today's dollars. You're right. Wouldn't be as impactful today, just given the long term there. But yes, we've got this in a larger model, and we have all those roads there. We focused on just the time period of the TIF, but you're exactly right. There is additional value after the TIF expires, and that's the case with the 4th floor as well. Just because, again, you've got that in perpetuity now.
It seems like the most important variable here, and I know they're all variables, so they can all move and change the equation. The most important variable is unfortunately one that's hardest to know, which is what happens to these sites without this TIF and thus without the current transaction.
Right. And
I think one end of the spectrum is that close to nothing happens, which is what's in this.
Right.
The other end of the spectrum would be to assume that it's still going to be fully developed at a comparable total investment value with or without the TIF. And then there's a million scenarios in between. But it seems like we have only those two binary scenarios, and we have not, it's a very difficult one, but to make this determination, we almost have to put some probability assessment on, at a minimum, those two different scenarios, right? Or some combination of additional in-between scenarios. Do you ever see that done?
Yes, and you can imagine we could run an infinite number of scenarios about what happens if it grows faster or slower. And we will run some sensitivity analysis there with others, and we have the ability to do that within our model here too. But tried to show you what I think is two ends of the spectrum, and there's kind of everywhere in between as well. But you're right. I mean, that's the biggest variable. We don't know what would happen without your participation, but wanted to try to quantify a scenario at least to put some numbers behind it.
And maybe speaking the obvious, but we have asymmetric information relative to all the other parties involved in terms of knowing what their intentions and probabilities and all those things are. So we're in a difficult position to make what could be a $350 or $500 million investment with even just 2% inflation. It's a big bet for us to make on limited information.
Right. And that's, not unique to your situation. That's the case with all these TIF districts. You're making the decision at the front end, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. The inverse could be true as well, where that development doesn't happen as quick or to the extent or scope that's maybe being considered. And so in that case, there's no risk to the school district on that. You're not the ones that are issuing debt that's supported by it or funding those projects. And that's where you kind of go back to the more tangible benefit, maybe of getting some of the benefit of the 4th floor and what you're doing on that front, which is more tangible, less variables at play there.
Yeah, I'll add, and I think this can be discussed a little further in executive session, particular to the IGA. But if you look at one like not Laurel Island, Magnolia, and I'll mention we added the TIF analysis per district. It's on board docs as well. If you want to look at all the districts we're currently participating in, we updated that through June 30th of 24. But look at one like Magnolia, for example, where it didn't build out as they anticipated. So in this case, the district getting the benefit of 75 Calhoun wouldn't go away even if the TIF never happened. But you could have a situation where the economy changed and the build out of Union Pier was either significantly lessened or very different from what they're currently anticipating. So the only conditioning would be the city's obligation to give us what we're asking for in exchange for our participation, not the other way around.
And to that point, I think I know the answer, but if the initial financing, if the initial TIF issuance is delayed 10 years, I assume we get revenues up until that point, and then the 30-year clock starts at that point.
Correct. So if let's say that, one of these properties sells and they go ahead and build a hotel. This is all hypothetical. I don't have any information to justify this, but let's say the parcel sells, they build a hotel, the city hasn't issued any bonds, then we would get all the revenues, incremental revenues off of the development until the point at which they issue bonds. And then from that point forward, the bonding capacity, principal and interest, that they've issued would take the revenues on at any point from that point forward. One thing that we'll talk about from an IGA standpoint is any revenue collected over the principal and interest on the bonds, we'd want to come back to CCSD. So in that scenario where the economic value is significantly greater and maybe their cap on bonding capacity exists, any greater revenues collected could then come back to CCSD. But we just, there's so many different ways you could look at that we're not anticipating any of that happens. And we're just using the pure, I think, $626 million in aggregate tax revenue generated by the investment information that they gave us just to generate a scenario lined up with what the city's redevelopment plan states. So we figured just if we kept it in line with the ordinance, at least that way the information the city's sharing and the information that we're analyzing is the same. But there's a number of different things that could happen. And in particular, you see oftentimes where TIFs perform better than anticipated and the bonding capacity is limited, and the economic conditions of issuing the bonds were favorable and the interest rates are low, and so therefore the principal and interest is maybe less than was anticipated for the purposes of the duration of the TIF. But in the event that the economic situation was different, that wouldn't create any additional liability to CCSD, since, as Mr. Cheatwood mentioned, the risk is with the city for any debt that they issue for it.
And that implies the risk of any, if the redevelopment costs go from 400 to 700, that rests with presumably the city or whoever.
Correct. Yeah, the city bears all the risk.
I don't have any other questions currently.
I had a question on, so in one of these projections, it shows that we're getting, or the district would get like 3.8 million in year 2032 before the TIF would start. Is that right?
If you don't mind, which?
He's on page two.
Oh, page 2.
So maybe this is Mr. Prentice's question.
Yeah.
So is that those funds that will then we'll be spending, but will be deficit in the next year, so that we get 3.8 to spend in 2032, and then it'll go to zero the next year that we get?
That's correct. So that would be general operating fund revenue of CCSD. And that's why we pay so close attention now to what these TIF districts are generating before the issuance of bonds, when they sunset, how they're growing, because we want to make sure that we're budgeting accordingly. But you're right. So that the reason that number, through 2032 is the way it is that's the assumed date that they issue bonds, which would then trigger them receiving the TIF revenue. So if they waited longer, we could get more, and we just have to be very cautious to make sure that we weren't budgeting recurring expenditures in our general operating fund budget, assuming that those revenues would continue. And we see those broken out on reports from Charleston County to ensure that we know, how they need to be diverted and how they can be expended for budget scenarios.
And my two other things. One, my only thought about looking at it as a lease that you're getting the economic value of whatever 37 a foot is. I would look at it more maybe as another way. Maybe you've thought about this and it doesn't make sense to look at it as a buyout. I mean, the city's squatting up there and costing the district probably $12 a foot annually. And I mean, just in operating expenses.
Yep.
And so like that's of value to get rid of them for your use.
And that's in there, right? What was the breakdown, but in the
It was, I
37
think it was
between,
12.
yeah, so
I think it was $12.
I think it was 25 and 12. I think 25 was the market rent, and then 12 was the O&M piece of it, that we're currently,
Yeah,
you know.
so them being up there is costing you $360,000 a year.
Mhm.
And that's not I mean, I guess it kind of washes out with the 37. But I maybe looking at it as a buyout is a simpler upfront way to look at it. If I mean, there are plenty of buildings downtown that you, except for a lease, they would have a lot more value, and that it's similar upstairs.
Right.
But my only other thing, I had a question on it's somewhere, the TIF revenues flattened about 2046. What was the reason for that?
So the assumption is that $2 billion worth of taxable investment would occur over the 2030 to 2044 period. And so just to take that last year, if the final investment occurs in calendar year 2024, that'll get a tax bill in calendar fall of 2045, and you'll receive, or the city will receive, that tax increment revenue in fiscal year 2046. And so the investment ends in calendar year 2044, and the tax increment revenues therefore flatten out in fiscal year 2046. There's the delay from when a project's completed and certificate of occupancy is issued, getting on the tax rolls, and then a tax bill the following fall. Revenues received that January. So there's that kind of, I know it's calendar year versus fiscal year, but a roughly 2-year delay from when a project's complete to when revenues are received off of that.
Okay. And then my only other question was on the debt service millage. Like that, most of that's set to go away in 2031. So is that, should that be included in your projection? Or do you plan on continuing to use it?
So we left it. We're looking at, you know, potentially the ability to reduce it a little bit further in a millage swap down the road. But after our long-term obligations are paid off, we'll still have our fixed cost of ownership and, you know, some of those programs that are funded by the sinking fund. And so there would still be a debt levy to take advantage of that full value of 4% and 6%, since we can't, you know, recognize the full value of 4% in the operating fund. So it's advantageous for us to have that debt levy, since it brings in greater value to be able to fund the, you know, the short-term notes that we issue for fixed cost of ownership and some of those other programs. So I mean, it would be reduced, but I don't think it would ever go away. There just wouldn't be the debt wouldn't be long-term in nature. It would all be generally callable within a 12 to 18 month period.
That's generally our assumption with the TIF districts across the state that we work with. Is we assume it's there because y'all will have other needs that pop up. And so it'll just, again, may not be the exact same amount, but even though your current debt's rolling off, you'll have other borrowing needs, other capital needs where you'll need to issue debt and maintain some level of debt service millage.
And that, I think David and I talked about this with some of the assumption on the, you know, the flat line of the millage. We know in our current 5-year outlook that, you know, we're predicting millage to be flat now that we've come up with a long range forecast, and we're tracking very closely to that. You know, but then also know that there could be, you know, further reductions in the debt levy in the 2030s. So if there was some corresponding offset and, you know, an increase in operating levy, it would probably be counterbalanced by, you know, a decrease elsewhere.
I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. I have a lot of questions, but I believe most of them some of them will be answered through executive session. But I wanted to get back to the fourth floor, but then also the trailers. We're leasing those trailers right now, correct? We own them.
Yeah.
All right. So once we get rid of them from Bridgeview, where are we just going to store them? Are they going to go to a school? Or?
Oh, no, they're pretty much beyond useful service life. We'll be lucky if anybody takes them away from us. Yes, sir.
You don't foresee us having to use trailers in anything?
No, I expect us to have to continue to use trailers on occasion, but those trailers aren't going to be reused. No, sir.
And this is also, just to clarify, this is an analysis based on if our policy changes, because right now we do not have IGA within our policy.
Yes, so the assumption is that prior to final vote on this matter, if it's referred forward, the policy amendment for the IGA would be in place, and that would allow us to give this consideration. As the policy reads right now, even though the state law specifies, the IGA being a consideration, our policy is silent on it. And so we want to make sure that IGA component is included to give us the ability to, bring about value to the district beyond just participating.
So we talked about all the things that were the positives of us entering this TIF. What would be the negatives of us entering this TIF?
Really, I'd go back to that last scenario of the no TIF scenario where it says if you didn't enter into it, then you could realize some revenue out of the gate from that, but it could be a much smaller amount.
Well, yeah, I get that part. I'm saying if we were to enter this TIF, what are the negatives that could come out of us entering it?
I don't see any negatives. You all aren't at risk for anything, as Mr. Prentice mentioned. You're not the ones issuing the debt. You have no obligation going forward. You are simply participating in it with no ongoing obligations. And so I don't see a negative of participating in it, assuming you all are comfortable with the benefit you're getting from it as well under the IGA, if that goes forward.
And I think absent the IGA, our recommendation would be not to participate or to participate at a substantially reduced consideration, based on the probability of this project even being able to happen without CCSD engaging. But, with this ability to recognize a fiscal benefit up front, that really changes the playing field. And based on CCSD's participation, this has never been a way that it's been considered before. I want to look at bond counsel in the room to make sure I don't speak out of turn here. But the law changed back in the 90s. Previous to the law change in the 90s, the consent requirement was not there. So, school district got a notice saying we're creating a TIF district. I think the one in Mount Pleasant that expired back in 2017 was such an example. And they were just out there creating TIF districts, and we didn't have any say in the matter. Law changed. Now we have a say in the matter. And then fast forward to 2012, not only do we have a say, but we have some negotiating power. And so this is kind of taking advantage of the negotiating power in addition to the consent, and bringing something about that, the city obviously sees value in giving us the fourth floor of this building based on what, they can do with the people that are in this building, housing them elsewhere and getting the ability to, use those tax revenues specifically to see the growth in Union Pier. So that, that kind of changes the entire tide of the matter compared to us just giving away the revenues.
We're currently inside of 8 TIFs with 2 not active yet, correct?
Say again?
We're currently entered into 8 different TIFs with 2 not active yet, West Ashley and Morrison.
So you got it. There's 6 that are active, and West Ashley and Morrison Drive, we didn't have any increment as of the 2024 fiscal year end. And so I reflected, that's the TIF projection report that's included on the item as of this past month with the numbers that we got from Charleston County. And we project these every year. So I'll just point out for those that might be looking at the document, below the amount that we saw in reductions for FY24 is our projection. And so we came in under our projection, which we always want to make sure our projections are conservative, and we don't want to come in over our projection because that means a reduction above what we budgeted. So we've seen continued alignment there with the projections based on the information that we track.
Okay. Any further?
One last question. Just interested, if you had to do this analysis before, how do you look at the cost of capital, or how should we look at the cost of capital for the district? Do you look at it just for marginal borrowing rate, or do you do something else? How do you think about that? If you were to try to present value these schedules of payments?
We would simply just, and maybe it's oversimplifying, just look at the cash flow benefit or contribution and just present value based on a borrowing rate and assumption of 4 or 5%. So we're not looking at kind of rate of return or cost of capital or anything like that, just a simple present value analysis.
So using something like our borrowing rate.
That's right.
4% we talked about earlier.
That's right.
Thanks.
All right, let's go ahead and go into executive session to discuss the second part of this. Do we have a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The ayes have it. We will go into executive session and we will reconvene directly after.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah. Yeah. We'll see, I would change it. Yeah.
Eight.
Yeah.
No more than 10.
Are we live? Do we have a motion from the?
Yeah, Mr. Calhoun, I'd move to introduce the following resolution.
Go ahead.
Whereas the school district and the city are negotiating an intergovernmental agreement related to proposed tax increment financing, and whereas the proposed IGA involves the school district giving up its right to collect certain tax revenues to support city infrastructure improvements for the benefit of development on state-owned property, be it resolved that the Board of the board, or the, let's say, the Audit and Finance Committee recommends the presentation of the proposed intergovernmental agreement as recommended to the staff for full board for formal.
I think we just need a recommendation.
Consideration. That makes sense?
Please, please offer your motion one more time.
I don't know that it needs to be in the form of a resolution.
I'm sorry, I'm traveling and this is bad internet. Whereas the school district and the city are negotiating an intergovernmental agency, IGA, related to the proposed tax increment financing TIF district. And whereas the proposed IGA involves the school district giving up its right to collect certain tax revenues to support the city infrastructure improvements for the benefit of development on state-owned property, be it resolved that the Audit and Finance Committee recommends the presentation of the proposed intergovernmental agreement as recommended by staff to the full board for formal consideration.
Thank you, sir. So in consideration of that, I think the gist of the recommendation would be that the full board be recommended consideration of the IGA as to be finalized negotiation by staff for participation in the union peer TIF, subject to CCSD receiving the perpetual benefit of the fourth floor of 75 Calhoun Street.
And I think it's critical that, the resolution is clear, that everybody understands that this IGA is still being negotiated. I know that's one of the critical factors is the 75 Calhoun. Or are we, and Mr. Calhoun, I think this just needs to be opened up for debate and discussion.
Do you want to try to reword this motion that is going forward?
So my suggestion is that the committee doesn't necessarily need to vote on a resolution. It would just be a recommendation to the full board for CCSD to participate in the Union Pier TIF district, subject to the CCSD entering into an intergovernmental agreement that conditions our participation on receiving the immediate benefit in fiscal year 26 perpetually for 75 Calhoun Street.
Mr. Grabowski, would you like to accept that wording?
I accept that wording.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that wording, but I do want us to have the opportunity to comment outside of
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and open it up for discussion. You can start it off, Mr. Griffin.
So I support the resolution and I will vote for presenting it to the board while still under negotiation. But part of, I think part of what this committee is supposed to do to serve the full board is to give our perspective from a financial perspective, what's in the best financial interest of the district. And while I'm extremely supportive of the work that the district staff, especially, and the city and everyone else has put into doing this, and I'm also very aware of and can see both the economic and strategic value of a potential lease conveyance, I don't think the value of that or the certainties or uncertainties around the analysis provide enough information with confidence that warrant the district, releasing potentially, based on this analysis, 350 with inflation, probably $500 million worth of future tax revenues, for the core purpose of economic development, which is really not our mission. So that's my voter opinion on that.
Sounds.
Can I just say ditto? No. I'm encouraged by the consideration being offered within the intergovernmental agreement, and I'm supportive of it going to the board for further discussion on it. I do have the same reservations that you just expressed as well, too, that there's a lot of unknowns within this and that our purview is to really make sure we're serving the school district versus the economic development side. I think a lot of good will be brought by this. However, there is also a lot of unknown by it. But I do support the negotiation of the intergovernmental agreement.
Duke.
Yeah, I support the motion as it goes, and just as I mentioned before, that I think there's enough benefit. Yes, there is risk going in the TIF, but I think we gain a lot of the benefit by knowing upfront that we have Calhoun, and I think that becomes a big advantage of entering in the TIF.
Carter.
Yeah, I'm comfortable supporting the motion as it was stated also, given that the IGA is still being negotiated as it was stated. As my employers, the Chamber of Commerce, they've also publicly supported the TIF and support this movement. I would have to recuse myself if it was specifically related to the terms under this agreement, given the relationship the Chamber has with both parties. So,
Garrett.
I only thought that, thank you for the analysis on this, and that I know in years past, we didn't have anything along these lines except as presented by a developer or the city. With one thing, and you may be done, paid, and this is your last part of it, and the district may not be willing to spend another dollar on looking at it, but if it would, my thought is if this goes, so presumably, is there anybody in the press here? Hey, okay, all right. Glad I have. So no, it's just to bring it all to a present value. Bring it all back to today's dollars versus, because like looking at TIF revenues, if we're only putting dollars towards the 400 million in bonds, then at some point over the 30 years, you're getting the money back that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise as well.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I guess that's another variable.
I mean, if it's a $3.5 billion development, not a $2 billion development, then I mean, and that's not a stretch. I mean, you could fit 3.5 million square feet over there. Stuff along there sells for $1,000+ a foot. So
No, you're exactly right. That is an option. We can kind of look at any excess that's generated. There's a number of those types of scenarios we could look at. Again, the base assumption is those are fully utilized to pay debt service, but we can look at any other what if scenarios to say, what if there's more revenue generated than is needed to pay debt service, and that comes back to the school district.
So what I might suggest, Mr. Garrett, is so Mr. Cheatwood is going to assist us with presentation to the Board of Trustees as well, is that perhaps he considers a amortization schedule for a 30-year bond issue at $400 million and what the principal and interest in current market conditions or projected market conditions, in the year that the bonds are issued would look like, and any areas where there's additional revenue where that revenue may come back just for presentation purposes. But of course, given that we used the city's redevelopment plan numbers for the purpose of presentation, I don't want to manipulate those numbers because it would just be presumptuous, I guess, to assume anything otherwise. But we could at least layer in what a $400 million bond issue with principal and interest over 30 years could look like in any areas where there's excess, where that excess would come back to us. Because certainly if they issue, and structure being a consideration, I mean, they could structure it where they, do several years of capitalized interest before they start, amortizing principal, or they could immediately, go into level debt service and start paying principal and interest evenly over 30 years. I would suppose they would probably structure it in a way where their years of low collections, they had some capitalized interest, and then they loaded their principal in the out years where they had more revenue. So it would be subject to what the city may ultimately decide to do, but we could at least show a scenario, with a, kind of traditional bond issue where there might be excess available, and we can share that with Audit and Finance via email, and then also present it to the board in our final presentation.
Would it be possible to, I know we don't want to monkey with their detailed projections, but just order of magnitude, if the development doubles or 50% more, if you've got 3 billion versus 2 billion, it's a material change to the numbers. Forget about the nuances of the timing. You can just proportionally show it just to give us some sense.
Sure. Yeah, we've got a model where we can look at different scenarios. Daniel, maybe I follow up with you in terms of which additional scenarios to show, but we've got the.
Yeah, Mr. Griffin, what I might suggest there is maybe we could get a phone call just to show you some examples. This is, all of this can be manipulated in real time. I don't necessarily want to get into showing additional versions of a published model, but we could look at kind of what ifs and sensitivities within the model that they have that, within Excel can be changed.
Ms. Stamp?
Okay, I know the motion was changed or reworded, but in hearing what Mr. Prentice said, I don't think that the TIF and the IGA are two separate things. I know some of us are trying to make it appear that these are two separate issues, but I see them as going hand in hand. And is this the formal vote now? Are we giving our formal vote now or just comments?
I'll call for the vote in a second. This is just the comments.
Can I give you my vote? Because I'm late for another meeting. This is going to way beyond, and I really need to leave. So, but I vote no to move it forward because I think that the TIF and the IGA are attached. And if we say yes to move this forward, we're in essence saying yes to the TIF. So my vote would be no. So when you do have your vote, you can cast my vote as no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just procedurally, she'd have to be present to vote. Otherwise, it would be absent.
That's good. Ms. Roberts?
Okay, well, I do want to vote. So can we move this on?
Yep, we just got to get to Ms. Robertson and Mr. Grabowski.
Okay, and so for the sake of time, I agree with the two gentlemen in the blue jacket. It's just too many unknowns. And I agree with Ms. Stamp in regards to the motion. I thought that we were discussing the IGA, but somehow the TIF moving forward and participating in the TIF has been intertwined in this motion. So because of that, I can't support this motion as it's stated. I want my colleagues to be able to, to discuss the IGA, but it seems like this committee is saying two things in one. And I didn't think that that was our purpose, to tell the board to participate in the TIF, but to look at the terms of the IGA. So for that, I'm just not agreeing with the motion.
So just to clarify, the nuance of this is because the participation in the TIF is conditioned upon the terms of the IGA, it all has to be wrapped together. Otherwise, our participation would just simply be what we've done in the past, which is yes or no. So the IGA spells out all of those conditions. So really, it is just the recommendation to finalize negotiations on the IGA, but it's being very transparent that the IGA stipulates participation in the TIF if all the terms related to 75 Calhoun are met. I don't know that there's any way to detach them based on the way this has been established. Otherwise, we would be participating without consideration for 75 Calhoun or not.
And if this committee voted no, would it still go to the board?
It would.
Okay, that's the important thing.
But the one question, just say for clarification, I mean, we wouldn't go in, CCC wouldn't go in the TIF if the IGA failed, right? So it's not like if that agreement falls apart, then we're going to do the TIF without it. So pretty much saying yes to this also says that the IGA is also going along. And as long as that's approved, then we go to
Correct. Correct.
So there's no chance of, if we approve it, the TIF going forward without the IGA.
Correct. So the way it's set up is our default position would be not to participate absent the negotiated IGA. Yep.
All right, Mr. Grabowski.
No, I'm fine, Mr. Calhoun.
Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and call for the vote. I'll call each person individually. Ms. Stamp.
No.
Thank you. Ms. Roberson.
No.
Mr. Grabowski.
Yes.
Mr. Hallises.
Right now, yes.
Mr. Griffin.
No.
Mr. Garrett.
I'll vote no.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm gonna vote no. Anybody keep count of that?
We'll note that staff's recommendation is divergent from that of the Audit and Finance Committee to the Board of Trustees.
Say that one more time.
We'll note that staff's recommendation is divergent from that of the Audit and Finance Committee to the Board of Trustees. So staff is still recommending it to the board, but it'll be noted that the Audit and Finance Committee's recommendation was not favorable.
Absolutely. All right. Given that, we will move forward to our next meeting will be November 5th, 2024.